Check, check. Mr. Mayor, we're at 6 o'clock.
Thank you. Then I will call to order the Riverside City Council meeting for Monday, April 21st, 2025 at 6 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Denning?
Here.
Ms. Fry?
Here.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Ms. Lomach?
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield?
Present.
Mayor Williams?
Here. All members present, no need to excuse anyone. Mr. Manager, any additions or corrections to the agenda as presented?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Denning and a second from Mr. Maxfield to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved. If you're able, please join us to rise and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we have a presentation from a guest tonight. Mr. Manager, I'll turn it over to you.
We do indeed. I will turn it over to Ms. Moore to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Beth, take it away.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I have with me John Benier from Montgomery County Environmental Services. He's an Assistant Director, and he is over the solid waste and recycling facility there that's located in Moraine. And they are here for their required, once every 5 years by Ohio EPA, their solid waste management plan update. It's a regulatory document that they put a lot of work into. The whole purpose of the plan is really to focus on how we reduce our reliance on landfills, waste reduction, and diversion programming. So John's going to give you a quick update of the plan, and then in the next meeting, we'll have the resolution to endorse it. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I appreciate it. Mr. Mayor, President of Council, and council members, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm not going to go through the entire 400 pages of the plan, nor am I going to go through the entire 6 pages, but I'm going to hit on some of the highlights for you tonight. Just a quick brief history of, how this all came about. Back in 1988, the Ohio legislature passed House Bill 592, also known as the Ohio Solid Waste Law. That required all county commissioners to develop solid waste management districts for the primary purpose, as Ms. Moore kind of pointed out, is to reduce reliance on landfills through waste reduction and recycling programs. But also, one other important thing that it did was require that solid waste districts also guarantee 20 years of disposal capacity for all residential, commercial, and industrial generators here in Montgomery County. So those are the 2 kind of key primary goals. There's actually 10 other goals in which we have to meet that are contained within the the state solid waste management plan. I'm not going to go through those 10. They're pretty perfunctory. They're more like education goals, programmatic goals, such as household hazardous waste, the tire program that we offer, those types of things. But I'm going to kind of focus more on where Montgomery County is at right now with waste reduction, and then talk about some things that I think are directly going to impact your citizens. So over the past several years, Montgomery County has been kind of stuck at the 23.4% for commercial and residential. That is one of the key primary goals that we have to meet, and it is a combined goal between the commercial sector and the residential sector. This year, when we did our plan, we kind of did a deep dive into all the data that we collect to come up with those numbers. And one of the things that we found was that in the reporting to our consultants, when they report their numbers up, one of our processors here in the county was reporting all of those numbers to the industrial sector. So what that meant is that the commercial sector, if they were in fact doing any business within the commercial sector, which I kind of happen to know that they were because I'm familiar with the company, we were missing out on some tonnage there. So I contacted one of my folks over at that company, talked to them a little bit and asked them to revisit those numbers and to see if there was any commercial within that industrial sector. They came back after a week or so and determined that actually 62% of what they had been reporting was in fact the commercial waste, which basically translated into 16,000 tons. That's pretty significant because it takes us 10,000 tons to move 1%. So it's not easy to go from, 23 to 25, but so we were able to move that needle. The other thing that we found was another processor here in Montgomery County hadn't been reporting. So I happened to have a happenstance meeting with the CEO of that company, and we began to talk and finally got around to, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been reporting over the years. And he said, well, my dad left the business and left it up to his kids, and so we're still getting our heads wrapped around it. We'll be happy to start reporting. So they did. That gave us another percentage. So we are now up to about 25.4%, which meets that goal. So the planning process really did help us this year. We're trying to determine where all those numbers are. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was, of course, we have to have programs to meet those other 8 goals that the state has. And some of those programs are the Household Hazardous Waste Program, the tire program. We provide corrugated recycling, styrofoam recycling, which we just had an event this past week. We also do education and awareness. We have about 3,000 kids that come through our education, our environmental education. Actually, the former mayor and his grandchildren were out today. So we get to visit with them from now and occasionally with them. And so, of course, when you have programs and staff, it costs money. Back in 2010, the Solid Waste District had a $2 generation fee. That's the primary means of revenue for the district. And in 2010, within the new solid waste management plan, the district decided to increase fees at that time from $2 to $3, and that's where we currently stand. We did a budget projection. Of course, in the plan, we have to do a 20-year budget projection showing that we have enough revenue to fund the plan. And so in doing so, we met with our financial advisory committee, which is made up of city managers, village administrators, township administrators, and some of their finance people. And they had staff make several recommendations to them on some options of how we could, balance the budget over that 20-year period of time. And we ended up with the Financial Advisory Committee making a recommendation to our policy committee that we increase fees from $3 to $3.65 a ton. So what does that mean exactly to your residents? The average household in Montgomery County generates about 1 ton of garbage a year. So pretty easy math, I could even do it. Is basically it's going to be 65 cents a year per household, or 5 cents a month. And then each year thereafter, again, we have to finance the plan. And rather than having huge escalators, like 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, they decided to do basically a softening with an annual increase each and every year. That way residents can plan their expenses. Municipalities who have contracts could also plan those. And they recommended a 6% increase each year, which what that translates into is about 22 cents per household per year. So that will be the fee that you find within the plan that will be submitted to Ohio EPA if the plan is in fact adopted. The other thing that this means, and it's important to understand, is that every 5 years we have to update our plan, as Ms. Moore stated. And we will be looking at those fees again. What I can tell you is I can never make promises 20 years out. But we did forecast our expenses and our budgets and did some decent increases in our expenses to make sure that we tried to cover everything we could. I do not see that we would need to increase it above and beyond with that 6% increase. And that's how we kind of settled on it, was matching those expenses with those revenues. So that kind of gives you an idea of the plan. That is important, again, to you, because when you go out for bid, and Ms. Moore and I spoke a little bit today about where you're at with that process. Or anybody bidding or any contract that you currently have has to understand that in 2026, because that's when the plan would go into effect, if the director approves the plan, those fees then would go into effect, and that would end up being an increase in your rates. So it's important for your bidders and anybody else to know that that is in fact going to occur, and then 6% each year. The final thing in the plan that will impact your residents and impact the community is, as you know, we have a significant litter problem throughout Montgomery County. And we've been looking at, of course, we help, one of the other programs that we help fund is Keep Montgomery County Beautiful, who gives out grants for illegal dumping. We also have an enforcement officer that we fund through the Sheriff's Department, and we also provide funding for the Health Department as well. So in that, we've been kind of looking at how we can improve litter or decrease the amount of litter that's being generated in Montgomery County. And the district does have rulemaking authority under the statute. And so the county commissioners adopted a rule in 2024 requiring anybody that brings waste into the transfer station, that load must be tarped. And so we are going through a program development right now, which involves a lot of community education, outreach. We will develop that, submit that to our director, and then, of course, it'll go up the chain to our county administrator, and then also then to the Board of County Commissioners approve. We anticipate that probably being implemented sometime in 2026. But anybody bringing waste into the transfer station in Montgomery County will be required to comply with that rule, and their load must be tarped when they enter the facility. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, John, thank you for your time this evening. I was just wanted to clarify if anyone who was just looking at their own property tax bill or their parcel ID information, is the 11,770 APC fee where they'd find the assessment that they're paying annually that funds Montgomery County Solid Waste?
That does not fund Montgomery County Solid Waste District. That funds the transfer station. All of those revenues go to the transfer station to help decrease the total tip fee that we charge at the transfer station.
When they arrive?
Pardon?
The fee that they're assessed when they arrive, when they drive in?
Well, there's a tip fee, and then the APC fee is on their annual tax bill.
And where does the assessment that you're describing show up on tax bills now?
It doesn't show up. The APC shows up on the tax bill. The $3.65 shows up at the transfer station. So when companies come in hauling refuse from wherever they're hauling from within Montgomery County, that fee is assessed at the transfer station when they come across the scale.
Understood. Okay, other questions for Mr. Menier?
Yeah, just a small question. I saw in the plan that there is a plan to approach recycling contamination.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of how much of a problem that currently is?
Sure, yeah, it's actually improved here in Montgomery County. There was a lot of communities got on board with what we call the Recycle Right campaign. We've been doing, education and outreach for that. At one time, it was about 21%. It is down to about 15% now. Our goal is to try to get it down to about 10. That would still be lower than most places in Ohio. But we continue to work with Rumpke, with communities to do outreach. We're doing a pilot program with the city of Centerville where we're actually using artificial intelligence. They used to do a program, they volunteered to do one about 3 or 4 years ago with the Recycling Partnership and Ohio EPA to tackle that. And they had people literally going out house to house, checking the bins, opening them up, and then leaving cards. This AI technology will actually, when it dumps, it will take a snapshot of what has come out in that material, be able to identify the contamination, and then immediately it'll develop a postcard and send it to that address. Just kind of a reminder, here is the material that came out in your house. This isn't acceptable, and just as a reminder. So it's kind of an instant type feedback. We're going to see how that works in Centerville, see what kind of reduction they have in their current percentage.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have good communication with the staff at Rumpke, especially in the recycling department?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a good relationship with the recycling department there at Rumpke?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we've been up to their new facility. We work with them on a regular basis. They are highly committed. They did just recently partner. I'm sure some of you may have heard of the Orange Bag Program, which allows you to do a lot more plastics recycling. And so they are highly committed to increasing recycling here in Montgomery County. We are looking at doing a few other things. As I said, we do have a styrofoam program. We've been running quarterly collections for the last 4 years on that. We are going to be soon looking at a permanent location so that that can be brought to us on a regular basis rather than the quarterly events. So a lot going on, but yeah, we do work with them very closely.
Glad to hear.
Any other questions? Mike?
So these increase in fees is based on the fact that the state doesn't increase any regulations in the process?
Yeah, it's as many of you legislators know, it's kind of an unfunded mandate and it's permissive. So we do try to write grants through Ohio EPA's Material Management Group, but you're correct, Councilman.
All right, well, if there's nothing else, then we certainly thank you for your time and for the information, and it's good for us to be in the loop on a lot of these things. It's this very timely discussion for us. So
Thank you very
Beth,
much.
as well.
Thank you.
All right, so then we can move along on our, on our agenda. We'll go to acceptance of citizens petitions. If there's anyone here with us this evening that'd like to fill out a slip in the back to speak on an agenda or a non-agenda item, you can just turn those slips in to the clerk, and we will move along to unfinished business, of which we have one ordinance, which will have the second reading, public hearing, and potential adoption.
We've got minutes and a liquor license as well, right?
I mean, if I went in order, yeah, we would.
I mean, it's your prerogative, it's your meeting.
I'm hitting the gavel on myself. I looked way further down.
Yeah.
So we've all had a chance to review the April 7th, 2025 council meeting minutes, and we should probably approve those. And let's approve those.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Lomatch and a second from Mr. Joseph to approve approve the minutes as published. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Minutes are approved. And then,
To any guest in the audience who's given their presentation, you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting.
Okay, I learned a lot from the meeting, so.
he'll learn a lot.
Thank you very much.
And we also have a liquor transfer, Mr. Manager, liquor license transfer, I should say. And you want to just talk about that briefly?
Again, just a transfer from Cowboys Lodi to Johnny DS, both at 4308 Springfield Pike. There were no objections to this, so no action required.
All right, thanks for keeping us updated. I've covered at length the public comment on agenda items. Do we have a slip turned in for an agenda item?
For a non-agenda.
Okay. Then, and now, we will move on to unfinished business, of which we have one ordinance where we will have the second reading, public hearing, and potential adoption for ordinance 25-0-865. Mr. Manager, that ordinance is?
This is the second reading and potential adoption for appropriations to repair the Eintracht parking lot. Again, that would be the parking lot lights and the gravel. We do have the funds for this. This just authorizes us to spend those funds in order to make those repairs.
Okay. So anyone joining us tonight, there will be an opportunity to speak publicly on this in just a moment. Is there a motion and a second?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion for Mr. Denning and a second for Ms. Lomatch. The Riverside City Charter allows for the reading of an ordinance to be done by title only unless a council member requests otherwise. Madam Clerk, would you please read this ordinance by title only?
Ordinance 250865, an ordinance to make supplemental appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the City of Riverside, State of Ohio, for the period January 1 through December 31, 2025.
I will open the public hearing for ordinance 25-0-865 at 6:21 PM. Anyone wishing to speak on this ordinance, please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Hearing no one and seeing no one come forward, I will close the public hearing for ordinance 25-0-865 at 6:22 PM. Is there any further discussion among members of council? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Denning?
Yes.
Ms. Lomatch?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield?
Yes.
Mayor Williams?
Yes. Ordinance is adopted. On to new business, of which we have the first reading of one ordinance and one resolution. So ordinance 25-0-866. Mr. Manager, could you please give us a brief update on that?
Yes, this is an ordinance that we would be required to adopt in order to participate through a negotiation process using the MVCC, the Miami Valley Communications Council, which involves us negotiating for electricity rates with AES and Miami Valley Lighting for our streetlights. This is a regional effort, and I have volunteered to help steer that negotiation committee with a couple other city managers in our region. We are likely to get competitive pricing if we participate and not competitive pricing if we don't. So I do recommend that you approve the ordinance.
All right, we got a motion for Mr. Denning.
Second.
And a second for Mr. Maxfield. The City of Riverside Charter allows for the reading of an ordinance to be done by title only unless a council member requests otherwise. Madam Clerk, would you please read this ordinance by title only?
Ordinance number 250866, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Riverside, Ohio, expressing the city's intent to negotiate jointly with other cities in the region on a one-price schedule under which electric light services shall be furnished to the residents of the city for the purpose of street lighting.
Is there any further discussion among members of council? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Denning?
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Ms. Lomatch?
Yes.
Mayor Williams?
Yes. So we will have the second reading, public hearing, and potential adoption on the May 5th meeting,
Correct.
or the agenda for May 5th. Thank you.
Yep.
And then we have one resolution, Resolution 25-R-3025. Mr. Manager, this is for Vision Zero.
Correct. As discussed at the prior meeting, this resolution is essentially the city council committing to a vision of having zero traffic fatalities in our community, particularly with respect to the Woodman corridor. And this resolution would be a required submittal if we go out for additional Safe Streets for All grant money, which I would advise and intend to do to try to go get construction dollars to make something happen at the roadway out there.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Joseph and a second from Mr. Brown. All those in favor of Resolution 25-R-3025 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We have a public comment on a non-agenda item slip turned in, I believe.
Yes.
All right. Sorry. Thank you. Mr. Ziegler, if you would please join us at the podium. Thank you for your time this evening. We always appreciate input from our citizens. You have a comment on a non-agenda item. If you would please state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you again.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is John Ziegler. My address is 4238 Blue Rock Road, Riverside, Ohio. I thought we were going to be talking about some other issues tonight, but I guess they're on the agenda for the next meeting, so I wasn't really having anything to tell you about that, since it's not tonight. My concern was what's going on in the city right now. I have a lot of issues, and a lot of projects have been going on, a lot of building construction, and I never received the newsletter, so I was trying to find out, is Redwood still going on Union Schoolhouse Road, or are they on hold, or, what's going on Glendine Avenue? I mean, are they cleaning up waste there? Are they actually building? I'm not sure what's going on.
Did you say you didn't receive a newsletter at all?
Yeah, I didn't get it.
Okay, well, we can certainly check that because I believe they went to every household.
Yeah, we outsource, and they do the whole postal area, so if you ever do not receive one, there is one online. It's loaded probably within a day of them being mailed out.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, we can make sure that that's operating efficiently, and we want everyone to receive a newsletter. As to your questions about the projects you mentioned, I will look to the city manager briefly. Those are, the projects that were named a moment ago, those are not public projects. Those are private developer projects.
Correct.
And the level of communication that we could provide per se would not necessarily be something that we would publish in a newsletter necessarily. Once a permit's approved, there's a period of time when an applicant or a developer can complete that project. But, if I'm neighbors with Zach and he pulls a fence permit, it's not necessarily my job to know when he's going to put his fence up. He's got a year to do it. So,
I thought you said you were going to put my fence up for me.
well, I might, but it depends on the weather.
So you guys don't want to step on any toes, pretty much? so-
Well,
But
I would also look to the law director. I don't know that it's necessarily it's not necessarily our duty, nor would it, I think, be correct for us to comment on a project that's being, that a private citizen, private property, private developer is engaging in. I would look to Jim for a minute.
If they meet zoning.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Lemach. If there are developments, particularly if they're as of right, if they're permitted by our code, and there's not a valid reason for them not to be able to move forward, and those developments do go through, even though the city is not necessarily involved with them since they're private developers, the developer must go through approval processes through the Planning Commission. If there are zoning issues, they have to submit applications and pull permits that have to do with our administrative staff and/or the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there is a process, and if the development is one as of right, meaning it is permitted under the code, it's in the right zoning district, et cetera, the city will provide information to the developer, but is not really involved other than facilitating that legal process. Thank you.
Okay, I think it goes back to my representation I'd like to get for our city, because, precincts need to know, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. We'll move along to the discussion items that the city manager has planned for us, of which there are 4. So, Josh, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will first turn things over to Mr. Miller, who has an update about federal executive orders and their impact on our community. And once I learn how to operate PowerPoint, there we go.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Manager and Mr. Mayor and Council. Good evening. So this will be just a brief presentation as part of some due diligence to keep the 7 of you apprised of some initiatives and decisions that are happening at a federal level. We're over 100 days into a new administration. Some of those will affect cities, and particularly our city. So this is just meant to be a very broad, thank you, overview of 4 key areas of policy initiatives at the federal level that either can or already potentially have an impact on cities such as ours. Just a brief overview about these types of orders. They're common in every incoming administration. They happen all the time. They set forth policy initiatives, and they can sometimes set forth action items of an incoming administration. They are always subject to litigation. So, of course, as your law director, I'll get to the status of litigation and where sort of these things stand. We live in a 24/7 news cycle, so we're always hearing about what's happening in Washington, D.C. It doesn't always affect us at a city level, and I'm keeping this limited to how this may affect our city, but thank you. But they are certainly issues that I have determined are relevant to bring forward to the seven of you. In case that your administrative staff, the manager, my legal advice, we may need to come to you with funding and appropriation requests or other policy changes just to ensure that we're compliant with the law. So those four key initiatives at the federal level that I'll briefly go over, and of course, happy at any time to answer questions or at the end of this brief discussion. I think the most important is the status of federal funding and grants and how that affects projects that we have ongoing or that we have earmarked to proceed and already appropriated. Merit-based policy and employment requirements that affect not only federal employers, but any sort of agency that contracts with federal employers, which certainly we have that in our city. To that end, federal workforce reduction, which affects federal agencies such as the base and other federal employers that we have as partners and constituents, and federal contract terms that need to be, that I'd like to be on City Council's radar so that if contracts look a little bit different moving forward, this council will know why. And then there's some Ohio-specific legislation that sort of stems from these federal policy initiatives with respect to restroom facilities and public accommodations I'll touch on just to ensure that the key there is that the renovations in this building are compliant with the new law and the ADA. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first and foremost, federal funding and grants. There were some federal policy decisions that appeared to freeze and did freeze some funding in order for the federal administration to review what were those grants and funding sources providing service-wise to ensure that they aligned with the incoming administration federal policies. How that's important to cities like ours is that we have a lot of federal grants that we rely on for road projects, for other types of infrastructure projects, and Mr. Manager and I are always keeping a watch on, are these projects affected by some of these changes in funding sources? This may affect council if we have to come to council and ask for some appropriations to occur to possibly realign some line items to ensure that we can keep particularly street and public transportation initiatives moving forward. Some of those that are already in process, such as the Safe Streets for All initiatives, could be impacted by the federal sort of funding fluidity. So we just want to make sure that we'll come to you when there's any changes or any pinch points that we may see, and we may be asking for legislation to help us out with ensuring that that funding continues. You can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Along those lines, we partner with a lot of federal entities based upon our proximity to federal employers and military employers. So another federal initiative seeks to affect how those types of agencies employ their staff and make sure that they are, there's a set of initiatives and policies that are used in the hiring and retention process. This doesn't just apply to federally funded agencies, but also cities like us that may partner with those agencies. And we want to make sure that we keep those relationships intact and we don't run afoul of any legal changes that have occurred. You can move ahead, please. So how that applies to us is that the contracts and partnerships that we have with agencies that are funded in any part by the federal government need to comply with any kind of changes that the federal government makes to any kind of standards related to hiring and retention of employees, as well as policy initiatives within those agencies themselves. We have a duty to this council to make sure that we analyze our operations that are important to the city, the business owners, and the residents of this city to ensure that our partnerships with these agencies don't run afoul of some of the mandates that are currently in place from the federal level. You can move on, please. Thank you. Again, speaking to our federal partners here within the city or located close by to the city, the federal workforce reduction, it's meant to streamline government operations, ensure that government entities are operating efficiently and making the most of taxpayer dollars that fund them. And how this directly impacts us, this is similar to the first topic with respect to federal funding and grants. You know, we rely on a lot of federal agencies for contracting. And if those agencies have some staffing fluidity, That could affect the length of time it may take for service to our administrative staff with respect to seeking compliance requests or seeking approval requests. So again, it's something just to keep in mind if we come to the seven of you with information that a project is in a bit of a delay, or if there's some trouble finding the right point person at a certain agency. There's a reason for that. We'll work through it, and we'll continue to keep you apprised of the status of those projects. Go to the next slide, please. And finally, federal contracts. This sort of is the overall umbrella term for everything that we've just discussed. When I draft contracts or edit and revise contracts for the city, I will always look to make sure that the provisions are compliant with law, especially when those the legal aspects that govern the contracts may change. So there are potentially, again, some provisions in federal contracts that may be affected by ongoing policy changes, wherever those may land, particularly with funding sources, and just making sure that anti-discrimination clauses are worded in a particular way that really has to do with our contractors subbing out work to other subcontractors. Again, all of this is to make sure the city's projects are protected for the benefit of our residents and business owners. Move on. Just very briefly, another initiative that is has already passed into law, Senate Bill 104 here in Ohio, that is sort of a response to, it's been an ongoing initiative, but it aligns with some of these federal initiatives, just has to do with how multi-occupancy restrooms are structured, specifically in Ohio schools, but there's always a possibility that could expand or be applied to public facilities such as City Hall. The bathrooms that have been renovated in this building and that are currently in the process of being completed are compliant. This really has to do with multiple occupancy restrooms, not family restrooms or single occupancy private restrooms. I wanted to make sure that council understands that the restroom renos in this building are compliant with both the state law and the ADA, which was a major reason that that project was undertaken, to ensure this building is compliant for its future. Move ahead, please. So, litigation. That's what I do, so I'm always looking to see what litigation is out there. There's litigation as to every single one of the topics I just talked about, and there always will be litigation about new initiatives from any incoming administration. I will always review through the Ohio Municipal League, OMAA, other federal, national and international leagues of cities to see where these things stand. This can change day to day. This is current as of today, to the best of my ability, unless something's happened since 6. But I'll always advise Mr. Manager and this council as to where litigation stands and how that will affect the 4 initiatives that we just discussed. Move ahead, please. So you're going to see a common theme here with all 4 of these initiatives. So the federal funding and grants, the freeze on federal funding, I think this is probably pretty well known for most folks that have seen this reported on in the news. You're going to hear the word TRO a lot tonight. There was a temporary restraining order issued to prevent the enactment of the federal funding freezes. There was some rescission of certain initiatives at an administrative level in the federal government. Long story short, even though much of the freeze on federal funding, I think the bottom line of that is that Congress had earmarked those funds to go to particular appropriations, and so there's some dispute as to whether or not there's an exceeding of authority in an executive order preventing Congress's will to appropriate those funds. There's a TRO in effect that pretty much prevents the enforcement of that. However, there's still a lot of red tape involved in ensuring that those funds are being distributed. A lot of states, through their attorneys general, report that certain projects are still not being funded. Mr. Manager and I will keep tabs on the projects we have that may be affected by this. And again, this is relevant to council because we may need to present legislation to all of you that may rearrange or reappropriate some of our funding. And this is why, because this is a fluid area that's subject to ongoing litigation. Move on, please. Thank you. Same with the merit-based policies. Many of these were temporarily halted initially, but a lot of those cases have either been voluntarily dismissed or they've been withdrawn by the plaintiffs. A lot of these had to do with some purely federal agency actions that affected only federal agency personnel. But again, where this comes into play for our city is I will always be looking at our relationships with our federal partners to ensure that we are not putting anything in any kind of contract or anything in any kind of procedure that would violate the current status of what the federal government is looking for contract compliance approval. Again, many state attorneys general are arguing against this initiative, saying that it infringes upon their abilities to maintain their contracts. I'll continue to monitor the litigation and provide updates as needed. Thank you. The workforce reduction, this as well was the subject of a TRO to block many of the RIFs that had been proposed. Many of those TROs then eventually by higher courts were stayed. Fancy word to say they were halted so that enforcement could continue. This is in flux as well. There has been a lot of effort to allow federal employees an opportunity to transition to other positions that may be more beneficial for all parties. Again, how this may affect us as a city is just our response time with some of these federal agencies that we contract with and ensuring that we respect the processes that they're going through internally. So that may impact us, and we'll bring that to your attention when that has implications on a project within our city. Go ahead. So the final thoughts, this quite literally, the landscape changes daily. Not every legal case, again, we live in a 24/7 news cycle, so not everything that's blasted across the news affects the municipality. My job will be to see what federal initiatives do and what litigation stemming from those initiatives has the possibility to affect us, and advise you accordingly to make sure that we all remain compliant and can provide our services to the residents and business owners within the city. As always, if any of you see anything and have concerns, you see something outside of a council meeting and want to talk with me about it, please feel free to reach out. That's what I'm here for. So if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to field them, or again, on an as-needed basis at any time.
Any questions for Jim? I would just say thank you for the very timely updates you give us over email when they're needed. It's always good for us to kind of in the moment get some of those updates, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, and I will continue that practice, especially if something is very pressing that will be well before or in between council meetings, to make sure that you're all aware.
Excellent.
All right, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
We're actually going to have Jim again here shortly.
Well, then reintroduce him.
So I'll reintroduce Mr. Jim Miller, who's our law
All right.
director, who will
Well,
speak
good evening,
to us
Mr.
briefly.
Manager.
Good evening. Who will speak to us very briefly about House Bill 315, which concerns, I guess, fees or for, again, I can't find words this evening, fees for public records requests regarding video footage for
Yes.
police departments. So I will get this queued up here as well. And take it away, Jim.
Perfect, thank you. And Mr. Manager, I will always have excessive words for you. Don't worry, I went to school to learn how to do that. So good evening again, Mr. Mayor and Council. So we had discussed House Bill 13 at a very broad level at a prior council meeting. This is a little more of a deep dive so that this council can determine what, if any, steps potentially this council would like to recommend to us as administrative staff in possibly taking advantage of some of the provisions in the law as amended, and how that may affect our operations with respect to law enforcement records requests for dash and body camera footage. It's very specific to that type of record series. So as we all know, the Ohio Public Records Act states very clearly that records that we house within the city and the arms of the city don't belong to us, they belong to the public. And this, the Public Records Act provides the mechanism by which any person, anybody, can request those records, and provides a paradigm for how we, as a city, have an obligation to respond to the requester. There are, within the Public Records Act, as we all know, various types of redactions, which stem from all different types of principles, privacy principles, statutory principles that keep some information private, the protection of security measures for the city. So there are a number of redaction types. One of those has to do with records that our law enforcement agency keeps. There are many, many types of redactions for ongoing criminal cases, and you can imagine that's to protect both alleged victims of crime, to protect the police process in terms of investigating more complex cases in order to protect uncharged suspects so that their identity is not blasted out over the stratosphere. So there's a lot of balancing of protection here. And where this can create some real complex work for the law enforcement agencies across the state is in responding to requests for dash and video camera footage. These happen in real time. These are typically switched on when an officer responds to a call, turns his or her light bar on in the cruiser, the dash cam goes on. When an officer steps out to engage in a dispatch call, that body camera clicks on. So there can be hours of footage from a cruiser and an officer responding to a scene. And if you think about multiplying that by 4, 5, 6 officers and cruisers, if it's a large event, that's a lot of footage to seep through. It's public record, and certainly anybody has a legal right to request that. But there are a lot of nuances that law enforcement staff must ensure are considered when reviewing that footage to blur faces, to mute sound, to protect children's identities, victims of domestic abuse, again, uncharged suspects, protect the confidentiality of undercover operations. So that, under the old Public Records Act, as of April 2nd, 2025 and prior, the city was not really permitted to take into account those soft costs of labor, personnel time, technology efforts in going through and actually reviewing and blurring and redacting those important records. The amended Public Records Act that went into effect April 3rd does allow, if a city so chooses, to engage in a way to recover some of those soft costs that law enforcement agencies have to expend to respond to those records requests. Thank you. And the way that it does that is by permitting a public law enforcement agency to have the option to charge an at-cost value that bakes into that at-cost value labor, technology, and other costs that were expressly not permitted prior to this amendment and are still not permitted for other types of record series. Typically, at cost means what is the cost of the paper, what is the cost of the CD-ROM that a record series is reproduced on, and still that is fairly minimal. I mean, paper, the Supreme Court has said about 10 to 50 cents a page is potentially reasonable. I mean, it's a minimal cost. This amended public records provision allows for all of those softer costs that are hard to quantify to be quantified in a representative value of no more than $75 per hour, and that's of video footage that is subject to redaction and review, up to a maximum of $750 total, so that represents 10 hours of police footage at 75 hours per video. Or, I'm sorry, $75 per hour of video. Thank you. And again, it expands the definition of actual cost to account for technology in reviewing, redacting, uploading, the technology necessary to blur faces. Sometimes, larger law enforcement agencies have particular records custodians and a whole staff that takes care of these types of requests. And so this specifically allows law enforcement records requests to accommodate the agency for these nuanced complexities with respect to reviewing these types of records. Thank you. Another, it's not necessarily a change, but the Public Records Act says for any record series, the public agency may require payment up front before the public records are provided. That is somewhat antiquated because many requests are fulfilled electronically. Many agencies simply will provide a gratis paper copy as a function of operations of the city responding to these requests. But what's important, I think, in terms of council determining whether or not to establish some type of fee under this amended provision of the Public Records Act, is that this is a significant change from the typical at cost as defined in other areas of the Public Records Act. And the fee may be required up front. The principle and the legislative history behind this is that if we're talking about the maximum of 10 hours of video to be reviewed, body and dash camera footage to be reviewed, and intricate technological manipulation to ensure that faces are blurred appropriately and audio is muted, takes a lot of time. And if the request then ultimately is not led to fruition, or the requester determines for any reason that he or she or they do not wish to receive the record anymore, prior to this amendment, that was just kind of time lost, time and resources lost on behalf of the law enforcement agency. They've produced a redacted record that's not going anywhere. So the Ohio legislature determined that this was an important provision to allow the police agency to use up to 5 days from the time it receives a request to provide as accurate as possible estimate to the requester and require that amount to be paid up front. And there are nuances. If the actual time is much less or much greater, that estimate can be adjusted when the production is ready to be made to the requester. But this is a large sort of paradigm shift. When we think of the Public Records Act, it's broad access at minimal cost. Well, this imposes the potential to allow a city to impose a cost that is substantial, but it is commensurate with the work that public law enforcement agencies have to go through to make the redacted record. So there are some legal obligations if upfront payment is required. There are very strict timelines that the agency must follow in providing that information to the requester, and then once that's provided, that triggers the clock, so to speak, as to what's a reasonable amount of time then for the agency to provide that redacted record. Move ahead, please. Thank you. So again, that's the legal consideration really, is that all the case law that discusses appropriateness and reasonableness of responses to public record requests, they're very fact specific. They turn on how complex is the request, how complex are the records that are being sought. So this adds another layer in that, and the LSC bill analysis of this indicated that really courts are going to look at were these tight timeframes complied with, and after the time frame whereby the police indicate to the requester, here's the estimated cost, the requester says, yes, please move forward. Did the police agency move with expeditious speed and a reasonable amount of time to produce that record, and was it reasonable? That's really the key point there. So really, a policy change can be as simple as what is provided here on the screen. The city can simply take the advice of council if it desires to implement such a fee and write a separate provision in our public records policy. The catch with that, and the other layer with that, is that this council has recently, within the past number of months, passed a resolution to, under state and local ordinance, state law and local ordinance, to place the responsibility and authority to enact public records policies on our Municipal Public Records Commission. So in order to also enact a fee, if this council wishes for us to consider that further, is it can simply be added into the master fee schedule that this council can pass by resolution, and that cuts off having to enact a separate policy. We would simply refer to the updated Section 14943 provision of the revised code as the enabling statute that supports the fee that may be included in that master fee schedule. So in sum, the points to consider for council in deliberating as to whether or not this may be an initiative that council would like either to discuss implementing or seek some further input on from us. There are benefits, for sure. There are benefits to provide a commensurate, the cost that the police agency expends in responding to these requests, it is not minimal. It is certainly a labor cost, it is certainly a technology cost, and it is time spent that is required by law, and the police are very happy to do so. But this law does balance the considerations and say, yes, the labor time that's spent doing this is worthwhile of being remunerated. And it does also allow that remuneration to be upfront. Doesn't have to be, but it's permitted to do so. And it makes the city whole for the software, the hardware, the soft costs that are involved in preparing the redacted video footage upon request. Go ahead, please. Thank you. And the challenges, because of course there are always challenges in a change like this, the additional timeframes are very strict. So it does add another layer of obligation to ensure that we are compliant if we do establish this type of a practice. Charging the fee up front, as I alluded to, it's a huge paradigm shift to what is the typical process and what is the typical expectation that folks that request records have come to sort of be used to historically. I will tell you that there are other municipalities sort of locally and regionally that have established this type of fee structure. But it is a change, and with any change, there are just the considerations to think of in terms of how will this affect folks that are seeking these types of records, and will it be prohibitive? Will it chill a request if a requester knows that there's going to be a fairly significant fee that may be required up front before the records are able to be obtained? And again, there are options, there are ranges that this council could decide are appropriate. I think this might be on the next slide, actually. Yes, so the legal options, it's not one or the other. There's a whole spectrum of options. One of them being, does this council believe this is an appropriate change to make in the first place? It's certainly not required by law, but it's an option now available to municipal law enforcement agencies that is, in my legal opinion, worth considering. The fiscal options are, if council does believe this is beneficial to implement, does council wish to just simply use the maximum fee permitted? Does council believe a fee below the $75 per hour of footage is more appropriate? I think it's important to note the city would have the option to waive the fee and build in some discretionary parameters. With that said, I said the magic D word, which is discretion, and anytime we utilize discretion, we have to make sure that there are reasonable and consistent parameters that are established. And, the fee under the law goes directly to police operations, so it's not as though the fee is just something that the city collects into its general fund. It does directly support the operations of our law enforcement agency. And then, of course, the legal considerations are just, training of a new policy, implementation of a new policy, and that extra layer of legal monitoring to ensure that we have compliance with the timelines that we've established by law and the new policy that we may establish as a city. I believe that's all I had, and that any questions, I'll probably have a seat, and I'll be happy to answer any legal questions from my seat, but this was meant to just provide a landscape of what council's options are and sort of help the manager determine what next steps are.
One quick question before
Yes.
you go, which is, under the state statute, I know we are permitted to recover wages, but we are permitted to recover total cost, meaning total compensation, meaning the total value of any officer or detective's time, wages, benefits, and everything else is recoverable under the state statute, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So then, for council's benefit, I think it's important to contextualize this a little bit. Thanks, Jim.
All right, thank you. Thank you all.
So that you'll recall, under the state law, our maximum is $75 per hour up to a cap of 10 hours, which is a total out-of-pocket of $750. Just based on our current staffing as it is today, if I were to assign an officer to review video footage, we are starting at more than $50 an hour, total comp, wages and benefits, in order for somebody to sit through a video and do redactions. So whether or not you decide, and you don't have to decide tonight, we're teeing this up just as an item for thought and discussion, but from an administrative standpoint, what I'll say is, at that rate, given an officer's time to sit and have to chunk through what could be a high-volume, lengthy records request that could well exceed 10 hours, we will pay that cost for that officer's time as a city for them to do that, and that's time that they may not be on the street. Or that they definitely won't be on the street, let's put it that way. And if they're coming in after hours, that rate's going to go higher because we'll be paying overtime for them to fill this request. So while I do understand that it is a change in paradigm for the state, my understanding is it's a fairly common practice in other states to bill at cost for records requests like this, just because that overhead and the amount of time required to deliver is so extensive. So I just wanted to offer that as another sort of item, food for thought, something to consider as you weigh a policy change or a fee like this going forward.
The reading of this legislation is kind of tricky, Jim. So it's saying $75 per hour of video produced. I don't know how often we are producing videos. If like how long is the average body camera footage? Is it a 15-minute incident? Is it a 30-minute incident? And so then are we talking about taking a quarter of that fee because we're only producing and they're only asked for a 15-minute window? I'm assuming, without ever having done this, that even producing a 15-minute police camera, like a body camera footage, is going to take not just 15 minutes of someone's time that we're paying total comp $50 an hour for.
That's an excellent point, and that's been a point of discussion amongst the sort of rollout through OMAA and OML of this, is that what does that really mean, $75 per hour? It is very clearly $75 per hour of video footage, not per hour of staff time, to your point exactly. And so to the manager's point, there could be a big difference between what's at cost for the actual officer that is conducting this work, time spent coming in, if it's overtime, if it's off-duty, the amount of time spent to redact a 15-minute video versus, I'm a lawyer not to do math, so $75 divided by 4 to mean 15 minutes, that would be the fee under the paradigm that's set forth in the law. So those are the sort of some of the very hard brass tacks differences between what does that cost mean. So that's a well-taken point. Thank you.
I have one question, Jim. I know it's highly variable, but how often is video footage actually requested on a monthly basis from the city?
So thank you for that question. I don't want to speak too much on Chief Robinson's behalf, but in working with him to put together some information to present to you, I'd say they're not uncommon. It's not uncommon to request body cam and dash cam footage. I will also say that this in no way impedes if there's an active criminal case going and somebody's charged with a crime. There's a separate set of criminal rules of discovery that allow, free of charge, the defense attorney or the pro se defendant to receive any and all documents within the police's possession. That falls well outside the Public Records Act. So this would truly be for somebody that's outside of a proceeding. A lot of times from just working with police in my background and working with our chief and our officers, you'll have people that are potential victims of a crime or people that were bystanders or people that know the person charged or know a potential victim, that they really want to know what happened. They want to see. They don't want to just read the narrative. They want to see with their own eyes what has happened from the officer's standpoint. And there's such a benefit to a requester in those shoes to hear the interaction and see the interaction versus reading a narrative or a supplemental written incident report. So to your specific question, I don't want to misspeak as to how often these requests come in, but I can with certainty say they're not rare. It's not uncommon at all. And many of the questions I get from the records clerk that works for our city police department has to do with some of the nuances with respect to responding to requests for video and what's blurrable, what's mutable, what do I do with this? So it is even if it's a short video that's being reviewed, it is a much more intensive review than simply looking at paper files.
Thank you. I can state from experience of having to review hundreds, if probably not thousands of hours of video in my previous position, it does take time. And having to go back and review and then review again just to make sure that you're not missing something or missing a face or blurring a face, it is very timely and it can be cost prohibitive on the city. But also I do like the fact that it does set parameters for us to make sure that we're getting it out in a timely manner as well. So yes, we're putting a charge, but we're also held to a time frame to get that out which is a right as well to our citizens to get that out in a timely manner.
My question would be, are these individuals, or if there's something happens in the city and the request comes from a lawyer's office, someone's hired legal, do they pay? Does the legal organization pay the $750?
They would, yes.
Okay, so in most cases, wouldn't that be the case? That, I mean, how often, percentage-wise, would you guess, and I know you don't know figures, but would you figure that, I mean, because we've had some big cases that I'm sure they've wanted film and whatever, but how often is it a personal expense to one of our constituents versus what they're, and I understand that you pay the lawyer, but I'm saying they work from a different.
Can I just piggyback on that? Because I don't know that I would be satisfied with an off-the-cuff answer. I would be looking for some sort of statistics of how often these are happening, and are the requesters a victim of crime, is a potential suspect in an interaction, or some other party? And I think that would help inform my decision.
Well, that's where I was going with this, you know, because I know if you hire a lawyer, there's certain fees that are embedded.
Right.
That are cared for, so.
Well, and we can certainly look at that. The other thing, too, that I think is worthwhile to consider is that after hearing, and Jim, reel me in, as I like to say, but this is not necessarily an all-in situation either. So, for example, one of the options maybe council could think about is there's no fee for any video if it's less than 30 minutes long. If a video is 30 minutes and 2 seconds, you know, if it's anything over than that, then a fee would apply. Or maybe there's a sliding
Put a
scale that's possible
limits
for
on
fees.
it or whatever.
So, and I think those are great questions, and what we can do is maybe a little bit of homework about sort of what the pattern of actual records requests have been, and try to give you a recommendation maybe that fits into that pattern a little bit, that tries to account for, you know, trying to not discourage or chill some of the smaller requests, but that for anything that's larger or likely to really create a big demand on staff time, where we're still capturing some of that, and maybe tweak that a bit and bring it back to you at a future meeting.
Well, I do know that our police spend a lot of their time in court, a time that we don't get to get reimbursed for. And so if there's any way that we can put something in effect that would offset some of the time that our officers spend out of the city doing court work, this would be a way to, wouldn't get it all back, because I know I don't know, I know the figures are out there, but I can't get them off my head, top of my head, exactly what we spend in time for our officers to be out of the city.
So media would have to pay this fee if they requested?
So media are subject to the same parameters and
As
same.
public requests?
Correct.
Okay. So, I
and
mean,
that-
that,
That's a good question.
Yes.
because that's, you know, to me, I'd be interested in how often we get requests, okay? And then, you know, and I think the sliding scale for anything under 10 minutes, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. But I do believe that since our cost is $50 officer hour, but more than likely, if we have a lot of this, we're going to want to do it on overtime, and just because we need people on the street, we don't need them doing this. So $75 is not unreasonable, because that's basically time and a half. So I think that's the direction we need to
Would-
consider.
I'm sorry, Mike.
That's okay.
Would this person that does this redacting and this, would it have to be an officer that does that? Could it be someone hired to do that?
It could
A
be,
paraprofessional, or?
certainly, it could be any type of administrative staff. It doesn't necessarily have to be an officer. It can
Okay.
be a record staff member. In larger municipalities, it can be even outsourced. It sort of depends on the operations of
Gotcha,
the
okay.
municipality. I do want to just briefly respond to Councilmember Lomach, Councilmember Fry's brief questions. I certainly would want us to get that concrete data from the law enforcement agency, which we can collate with the manager to help inform a final decision. I can say with certainty, to Councilmember Lomach's point, the robust and I would say overly complex, very overly broad, where we have to fight back and forth about this is not a proper request. Those come from not individuals, but those come from law firms that are hired in usually civil matters.
Right.
And they will seek the broadest amount of records possible. And if those are these body cam and video, dash cam videos, that's a substantial drain. And I think there's a huge difference in policy between that type of a request and, to Councilmember Fry's point, a potential victim of a crime. And there are, Ohio has a Victims Bill of Crime, Ohio Victims of Crime Bill of Rights. But I think those sensitivities between the different types of, a sliding scale, how complex is this, that can all be considered by council. And again, there's always an opportunity to add in some of those parameters to respond to requests and assign a fee that follows a particular consistency, but also takes into account these factors. And so I would certainly want to your point, Councilmember Fry, get hard data before recommending, a nitty-gritty nuts and bolts type of a recommendation from a legal standpoint to council.
Thank you.
I do have one. Do we have software that does this already, or are we going to have to buy software?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
And the other
I
question
suspect
I
we do
have
not,
is
but
there
we'll-
software out there that you can set the parameters and the AI can kind of crank through?
Potentially, my impression, based on some prior
And I don't
experiences-
expect an answer tonight.
No, but I think it's a good question, but based on some other experiences and actually a couple clients that I had out of state, the issue with that became, even if you can find the software that is able to automate or track somebody's face and blur it out, somebody still has to watch it.
Right.
Because you still have to pay somebody to verify that the software did it accurately. So you can reduce some time, but you can't eliminate.
Right.
Some of that time.
Well, if we do go forward with this, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, I would like to see that we track how much time it's taking and maybe consider hiring somebody even part-time on an on-call basis to come in and do this work to keep the officer on the street.
I mean, for the scope here, just to say kind of where we're, like, the overall thing, I mean, we're talking about $1.25 a minute of produced video footage. I'd employ anybody to go out and try to find somebody to review and redact or even look at a video for $1.25 a minute. I mean, we live in a digital world. It's an expensive service, a very expensive service.
Well, I understand,
So, I
but
mean,
Steve would keep the officer
I
on the
think-
street, and that's what,
I think there's, for what we're hearing, there's data that we need from the police. This is a larger conversation, and I know that, to be fair to our law director, he doesn't have all the answers tonight. And I think this is a conversation that we're going to have at a later time. And I
Yeah,
think
this
that'd
is
be
an
more
introduction
appropriate
to
then.
what is now allowable according to ORC.
But I think just in terms of summary, before we move on to the next item, this has been helpful for us. So we will go back and go get some numbers together, kind of put some thought behind what kind of a policy may make sense based on those numbers, and look into things like software opportunities, those sorts of things. And I'll intend to come back to you in the next several weeks with an update on that front. But this has been helpful, giving us some direction about what your appetite is and what you might be interested in. So we'll go do our homework and we'll come back.
All right, and moving on to the TIF funding updates.
Just two quick things. We, council passed, ordinances in prior years establishing TIF districts at the Woodman and Burkhardt intersection, which involves some properties around there. I believe it includes the new Kroger and some of the adjacent parcels, as well as you'll recall down at the Springfield Street corridor, just down in here. The Springfield Street corridor TIF, I know all of these have to be reviewed by the state before they're officially official. I believe the Woodman Burkhardt TIF was recently approved by the state. In any event, we need to establish funds inside the city's budget to hold money that will be deposited into these TIF districts. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'll have two ordinances for you in May. Each district requires its own separate fund. So we will have one ordinance for Woodman Burkhart TIF and the other ordinance for Springfield Harshman TIF. And those will be the usual 2 readings, public comment, and et cetera. But once they're adopted and we start to receive payments, we'll be able to put the money where it belongs for our audit and our budget.
So but we still already have the Airway Woodman TIF, right?
I believe that actually just recently expired.
Oh, okay.
I'm asking the Shared Resource Center to do a little bit of extra homework on that. That TIF, that fund, bless you, that fund still has, I believe, some balance in it. And we had intended, or this year's budget assumes we will use that balance as our local match for the money that Congressman Turner awarded us through the congressionally directed funds to do the design work on the Woodman corridor out here. So that money has been spoken for in the budget, if you will, but I don't believe it collects any more revenue after this year. Moving up very briefly to a couple other quick items. One actually kind of touches on the Shared Resource Center. As you'll recall, we signed a contract with them to provide interim finance director services. Our recruitment for incidentally, for anybody who's out there watching, our recruitment for the finance director is going pretty well. We have over 20 applicants so far. I believe I have enough in that to start an interview pool. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be at a place where we're not going to need the SRC for the rest of the year. But having said that, we are coming up on a period where we have paid them enough, where now we're starting to bump up against our procurement ordinance. So I will need council to approve a resolution to basically continue that contract with SRC until we place someone. And there is a likelihood that we will need to have an appropriations ordinance. What I'd like to do is basically use some of the personnel money that we would have paid a finance director to pay for that contract. But since that's moving money between categories, it requires a reappropriation ordinance. So Jim and I will hammer that out, but I will give that to you as a package and basically say, here's a resolution that gets us for 8 more weeks or so with the SRC. I'm going to need about this much money to do it, and we'll present that to you at a later date, probably in May.
So you're about to start an interview process, like soon-ish?
Soonish. So our first review of applicants is the beginning of next week.
Okay, so like, I mean, we're thinking like a month and a half for a typical process, and then like onboarding. So I mean, you said 8 weeks, but
8
I
to
would
12
assume
probably.
that like there's a level of transition that the SRC is going to be working with that.
Well, and there's also a level of professional courtesy that anybody coming in is probably going to need to give their employer. Typically, it's a month.
Yeah.
So I'll eat the words I just said. 8 weeks is probably pretty optimistic. It'll probably be a couple months,
Yeah,
but we'll get there.
2 to 4 months or something like that.
We will do the math and get back in front of you.
Appreciate you.
Yep. Second item is, there's been a lot of chatter about House Bill 28. This is the House bill that effectively eliminates replacement property tax levies. We are being asked, we being staff, the city, I know the Attorneys Association has been on it too, and the Ohio Municipal League, are all asking for communities that are interested in voicing opposition to that bill as the Senate considers it, to indicate that some way, whether it's through a motion, resolution, et cetera. There's no obligation to make a decision this evening, but I wanted to create the space to have the conversation. If you would prefer that we attach the city to some of these efforts to push back on, or to advocate, lobby, et cetera, on that bill, we are happy to do that, but I would like to have a motion or some direction from you all in order to take that position with our colleagues in the state.
What's our timeline on that? So you want the resolution?
We don't necessarily need a resolution. We could handle it the way we handled the other item earlier this year, where if there's just a motion that we support any, like the OML's position on HB 28, something to that effect, then I could certainly write a letter, or Jim and I could write a letter and sign it on behalf of the city.
I would say, just for not even just the 7 of us, but for our public's sake, that we have a discussion about this before this council makes any action, just like a voice resolution or a voice motion. So I would request that we table this and kind of have a discussion at our next meeting about what the House bill is, and then kind of what the OML stance is and what the implications would be if this passes.
I can certainly prep for that. Is there anything in particular you want us to come to that meeting with?
I mean,
Just what he-
Aside from the overview.
Just what he outlined.
Okay,
Yeah.
just the overview. Gotcha. We
And
will
I
do
think
that.
I would ask, on Zach's behalf, that anyone who is maybe not as familiar on what the implications of no more replacement levies would mean for the city, get a hold of Josh or do your own research, but I think that it's a discussion that we should all come ready to have
Okay.
in May.
We will tee that up. Third thing is, I do have a few change orders that will be coming to council with respect to Wright Point and our renovation work. A good example of this, and honestly the most expensive one, will be fireproofing related on the 5th floor of the tall building across the parking lot. The way that building was constructed, basically at the bottom, the ceiling pan for the roof, when it was built, they sprayed a whole bunch of fire substance. It's not quite a foam, but it's a fire retardant that's on the bottom of that pan. It had started to fall off before we were doing renovations, and then as they're doing the roof, they're taking all the ballast off the roof, they're mechanically fastening these things.
It's all falling off.
It's all over the place over there. And we have an obligation under the code to replace it. We don't have an out based on when the building was built and how it's sprinklered. We have to replace that fireproofing. So that will be the largest single change order. I have a couple other small ones, for example, some additional painting, just to kind of clean up a couple areas. We've talked about putting a timer on the electric vehicle chargers out front to be sure they're only on at 8 to 5. Right now, those are tied directly into the rest of the building circuits, and there's no way to turn it off without flipping the breaker. And on a similar note, a lot of our breakers are wired kind of all over the place, and so we've discovered as they've been replacing outlets in the hallways that it's turning off other things, like lights in the restrooms and other critical infrastructure. And so I would like to pay a little bit extra to get them to clean that up and isolate some circuits so that we're a little more stable. I will have a fuller breakout and a report to all of you. I'll send it to you by email in advance of the meeting. As of right now, I'm confident that we have enough money in the Wright Point Fund to absorb these costs, mostly because we ended the year last year with a little bit more ARP money than we expected, which meant we have a little bit more in the Wright Point reserves in order to absorb these. So cautiously optimistic, but I will get those quotes together and send them your way. And the final thing is our consulting services RFP. So I asked the department heads to meet last week. We had 9 submittals. I might have mentioned that last time, which is, I think, a very good sign for a community our size. It conveys a lot of interest. The department heads went and reviewed and scored all of those submittals. They've narrowed it down to 2. Our expected range in terms of cost is between $50,000 and $100,000 or so between those two. And I just want to mention, I'm in the process of doing my own due diligence on both of those submittals and those firms, but I wanted to reemphasize that one of the reasons and the rationales why I think it makes a lot of sense for us to make that investment, and I would call it an investment, is because over the last several years, there's been a lot of discussion about staffing levels in particular. And to anybody that's watched our council meetings over the last few years, when we show the budget books, if you've come to the Citizens Academy, if you've come to the budget committee meetings, you'll know, because I say it all the time, that people are the biggest expense. They always are in every city all over the country. A lot of operations, that's the way it goes. So when we are talking about staffing, we're talking about the biggest thing that makes the biggest impact on our operating budget. And there have been a lot of numbers and a lot of thoughts about what our staffing levels should be in various departments. But one of the things we have not had is a neutral, data-driven third party come in and look at, based on our actual calls for service or our actual work orders or the demands that we currently have to provide service, what does it take to actually field and respond to just those demands? That is a deliverable that I would expect out of this process. And what I think that does is it provides all of us, it provides the public, it provides our departments with a 30,000-foot neutral view about what it takes to actually provide service at today's service levels, especially in an environment where everything is different than it was a year ago, much less 3 or 4 or 5 years ago or before the income tax adjustments. Wages are higher, inflation, electricity's higher. Healthcare is higher, everything has gone up, our costs certainly have gone up. And so I think it's important to be intentional about arriving in a data-driven way at the number of people we actually need, so that we're not doing the taxpayers a disservice by over or under hiring for all of the functions that we're being asked to provide, just to try to do right by the taxpayer by coming up with that math and arriving at those numbers. So I will continue my due diligence, and I'll be in front of you in May with a recommendation. Like I said, we've already set aside some budget money to pay for this, and so I'll have that prepped for you as well. Any questions on that front? And if not, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have.
All right, I just want to make sure folks know that we are going to an executive session after council member discussion for the reasons listed on the agenda. But I would go around the horn and ask if any council members had any comments for this evening. I just wanted to add that the airway TIF fell off at the end of '24, so it's no longer active. We have 4 active TIFs: Springfield Corridor, Woodman Burkhart, and then 2 at Brantwood. So the first 2 are 10-year TIFs, the last 2 are 30-year TIFs. That's what we have active currently.
Can we give just a quick thing for anybody watching not aware of what a TIF is, what a TIF, like why we have TIFs,
Tax
what they do?
Increment
Right,
Financing
finance.
Fund. There's
Okay,
2 Fs.
and what, why does the city get into a TIF?
Well, when we get into an argument, we get into a TIF if it's not a big deal.
Because
But-
you're not putting in my fence.
No, unless it's nice outside. But I would, I'll take a crack at it, then I'll let the manager talk.
Go, please.
Because in a previous life, I did a lot of these. A TIF, tax increment financing, allows a developer or a city or an area to capture increased property tax value over a set period of years that goes into a pilot, P-I-L-O-T, payment in lieu of taxes fund, that can be used for infrastructure, different upgrades, that generally benefits not just the people in that immediate geography, but the folks further out. So a infrastructure TIF on the Springfield Corridor or Woodman Burkhart or previously Airway would allow for some public infrastructure upgrades to occur over a period of time that maybe wouldn't have been as attainable had there not been a TIF. Josh, what'd I miss?
That's essentially it. It's basically, in a nutshell, taking the extra revenue from a development like Kroger in terms of property tax and using it to pay roads.
Yeah. So if we capture the property tax on Kroger the day before they broke ground, and then capture the tax increase that happens over the next several years with a $23.5 million investment, then there's a large gap there that allows for a set period of years that increase in property tax can go to a specialized fund to improve infrastructure, usually at the beginning of a project, and then that is paid down over, say, 10 years to allow for that infrastructure to be realized and benefit that area.
But it also not just city taxes, it also includes the increase from the county taxes and the school taxes.
All
Now,
property tax.
those places do not lose any money from what was there. It's just on the increase. But, so, to my point, is those other places also help us pay for the increases the positive things that are happening in the city.
And so the reason
In
why.
that area, and it's held to that specific area.
Yeah, and I know you already knew that, Zach.
Oh, yeah, no, the reason why I asked this is like, we say these things, like, we're gonna repurpose money to fund a TIF and create a new fund and do all of this, and it's not little bits of money, it's thousands and thousands of dollars, and I think back to like when I moved into the city, if I was to tune into Riverside City Council for the first time today, we've been doing this I've been sitting at this dais for a little bit over 3 years, so like, I'm aware that we've had these discussions, stuff that we talked about, but sometimes I think it's just helpful that we do a little refresher
Well,
course
and
every
it
once in a
helps
way,
people
again, back to
understand why we
previous
did it in the
conversations that we've
past.
had.
Well, it
Why
sounds like
would
we're
it
starting a new
pass?
fund, and then we're gonna fund it.
Right.
We're gonna move all this money over.
Right, and I think sometimes just having just a refresher back to some previous context for the viewing public, the 35 people who might go back and watch this video later on, is just helpful from time to time.
Well, and I should jump onto that because I think it is important to emphasize that although, for example, like we've established the Springfield Street TIF district, there's not been a whole lot of new development. Hence, there's not going to be a whole lot of money coming into that TIF until and unless we get new development, new revenue coming in. At the same time, we do have to set up that fund so that if the development happens, we have a place to
Yeah, we
put
can
new
capture it.
revenue. But that's an excellent point, because it's not free money.
Yep.
There's still economic development that has to happen.
All right. That was actually my council member discussion point, was TIFs. And I think Zach used his also. And I'm not putting his fence up. You're on a corner lot, that's going to be a nightmare.
I already have one. I just need to replace
Does
it.
anyone else have any council member comments they want to share before we move into exec?
I do.
Of course.
Yeah. I would look forward to seeing you at the MVRPC dinner on Thursday. For those who are not aware, I should be giving up the chair's seat with Thursday night. However, I will not be giving it up. I'll be chair through the end of my term here on council. Won't go into those details. I want to thank the J.C.'s for an outstanding effort with the ROTC kids on Saturday morning. I arrived at 25 minutes to 10, and there were like 5 cars in the driveway, in the parking lot. And by 10 o'clock, there must have been 2,000 kids there. I don't know where they just fell out of the sky, but it was a wonderful event, and the rain held off. It was awesome. And I want to thank them again that's a big effort. If you've never done that kind of thing, it's a lot of work. And the J.C.'s and the ROTC kids just really pulled off a super event. And I would like to say that I'm thinking about, I'm not a member of St. Helens. However, I have many, many very close friends. And I have grown up in my Riverside experience with St. Helens, and have known some of the pastors of that church that have meant a lot to me. And I want to reach out and say to that community that we're all thinking about you today. It's a hard thing, and I hope that the children understand and I'm sure families that have children that are closely involved are making a real effort to help them understand the role that he's played. And he's certainly been a friend to people in this world who need help and need support. And I want to say that as a city, we're supporting the St. Helens family.
And to clarify for anyone watching, you're talking about the passing of Pope Francis?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I also say there's a number of St. Peter and Our Lady of the Rosary parishioners that live in St. Helens, or live in
And
Riverside
Carol's
also.
family.
So we certainly appreciate that, and he was certainly a voice for the voiceless. Anyone else have any council member comments? I'm trying to just do open forum instead of just calling people out. Now, you talk. Maybe I'll go back to that.
I would like to, with the J.C., the fire department did an awesome job bringing the Easter Bunny to the Easter egg hunt, and it was a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. This was the, I believe, the 44th year for that at Beverly Gardens. So,
So generations of families have had that Easter egg
generations
hunt
of
right
families
there.
have done the Easter egg hunt at Beverly Gardens with the
they literally
JCs.
were
But I
like-
do also think that, I believe that the Apostolic Church did the egg drop at the middle school, which was very well attended. Stebbins High School was packed, their parking lots were packed, and so was the middle school. So they did a really good job, too.
937 Barbershop did a big.
Yep, that's right. The
And Way of the
barbershop at
Cross
Airway did one.
did a nice one, too.
So many community partners that made this past weekend a very enjoyable one for many, many families. So it's great to just be able to thank them, and they make this community go.
It's about community. We just make up the government for the city. We're just part of that community. And people make the community.
Don't say anything.
Well, if there's no other council member discussion items, I will ask for a motion to go into executive
Move to
session
go
for the
into
reason listed on the
executive
agenda.
session for the
Second.
reasons stated on the agenda.
So Mr. Denning has made a motion, and Mr. Maxfield has made a second for going into executive session at 7:35 PM for the reason listed on the agenda. Do we need a roll call? We need a roll call
Yes.
vote. I should
Mr.
know that by
Denning?
now.
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Ms. Lomach?
Yes.
Mayor Williams?